Hello and welcome to 502 Conversations. I'm Brian Kirby, and it's my great honor to have Dr. Harriet Hall in for a conversation today. I thank you very much for coming, and I want to read part of your bio. It's so impressive that I don't want to make any mistakes. So, Dr. Hall is a retired Air Force physician and flight surgeon. Her website is skepdoc.com.
That's skepdoc.info.
Right, you're right. I'm sorry. Skepdoc.info. I did write it down correctly. Where she writes about medicine, so-called alternative medicine, science, all kinds of quackery and critical thinking. She is a founder and editor of the science-based medicine blog. She writes the Skepdoc column for Skeptic magazine and is a frequent contributor to Skeptical Inquirer. And somehow she also finds time to be a medical advisor and writer for the Quack Watch website. And she's an author of at least one book, Women Aren't Supposed to Fly, the Memoirs of a Female Flight Surgeon. Thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And the first question I have for you is, why write about scam? I mean, why did you decide to, and I must say, I use the acronym SCAM, so-called alternative medicine. Did something happen? Was there friends taken advantage of, or had you just had enough?
No, I never had any personal encounters with scam. I got started looking into it for just pure curiosity, pure intellectual interest. I read things about it that struck me as funny. So that was one attraction. It was entertaining, and I was appalled that so much misinformation was being spread, and I wanted to try to understand why people were falling for things that were so obviously not true.
And so when you say you were interested in it, you didn't read it and say, wow, that looks interesting. I wonder if there's anything behind this. You were interested, how can this even be happening?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And how do you decide to pick up a topic? What if you're writing on acupuncture or chiropractors, why write on any particular topic?
Well, I get most of my ideas from things that I read in the newspaper or that I hear online, things that make me angry. And I get to let out my frustrations by writing about them. So it's kind of like a psychotherapy for me.
Oh.
And more I'm getting ideas from people who write me. They'll write and say, why don't you write about this subject? Or they'll write and ask me a question. My friend says I should try such and such. Do you know anything about it? And I'll look it up, and by the time I've answered their question, I have the makings of an article. I also read a lot, and I write book reviews. I like to share the good books that I've read with other people.
And I just read your article in this latest issue of Skeptical Inquirer about how you became involved. And one of the things I found interesting is you were a flight surgeon, a physician, but you kind of thought there was something to ESP or maybe that end of the paranormal, which I found interesting because it kind of is like when the physicists that were debunking Uri Geller, they never thought they were going to be lied to or tried to be tricked. So they, even though they're very smart in this one general area, they were falling for that. And so, do you have just a second to expand on that a little bit? I hope I didn't insult you there. I hope I'm representing.
Oh, no, I believed in a lot of weird things when I was young. I believed in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. And when I started reading Skeptical Inquirer, I learned that there were other explanations for some of the things I'd been reading about, like ESP, and there really wasn't anything to it. So I got educated by reading the skeptical literature, and I stopped believing a lot of the things that I'd believed.
Let's talk about alternative medicine here and how it's gone through a few phases. It's now complementary and alternative medicine. It might be moving to integrative medicine. I don't remember what it was before alternative medicine, but it was something. But for some reason, it has a positive connotation. And I just want to read this question that I wrote out for you because I want to get it right here. So I flew here, right? I wouldn't have wanted to find out just before takeoff that we had an alternative pilot. I don't want an alternative lawyer. I want someone trained in legal expertise, and it's actually against the law to practice law without a license. And I had a root canal a few years ago, and I know I would not have wanted an alternative dentist. And so to me, alternative, one of the meanings is not. You're not a dentist, you're not a pilot. So why is alternative medicine looked upon with respect?
Okay, in the first place, there's no such thing as alternative medicine. There's only medicine that's been tested and proven to work and medicine that hasn't. And if something is tested and proven to work, you can't call it alternative anymore. Alternative medicine is not really a legitimate scientific term. It's a marketing term, and it's used by people who want to employ untested and disproven methods, and really combining quackery, if you want to use that word, with legitimate medicine. So the whole thing is really a marketing scam, if you ask me.
So can anyone literally call themselves an alternative medical professional? I mean, it's called alternative medicine. Could I just all of a sudden become an alternative medicine specialist?
You can call yourself anything you want, and that's what the integrative medicine people do. They call themselves integrative medicine specialists. Mark Crislip had something interesting to say about integrative medicine. He says that you can't integrate imagination with reality, and if you try to integrate cow pies with apple pie, it doesn't make the cow pies taste any better, and it kind of ruins the apple pie.
So literally, I could go home right now and just go out into my garden and pick some blades of grass, put them in capsules, and call it Brian's remedy for whatever, or not remedy, I guess, but I mean, there has to be some. I couldn't call myself a doctor. That's
Well, you could be prosecuted for practicing medicine without a license, technically. But the government is licensing acupuncturists and different kinds of alternative medicine specialists, and that gives them a certain prestige.
okay. All right. Pardon my stunned expression. Is that all right? So I want to talk to you about, because you do a lot of research, I want to talk first about studies and statistics, because that's part of how you know things work. Or not you specific, well, actually how you know things work, but how we all know things work. And one of the most impressive studies is regarding smoking and cancer. It's known that smoking causes cancer. Lung cancer occurs 20 times as much in smokers than in non-smokers. So if it's 1 in 10,000 in non-smokers, it's 20 in 10,000 in smokers. But sometimes the media make a big deal over these so-called cancer clusters or other certain diseases that pop up, saying that if you live in Newton, Massachusetts, you're 35% more likely to get breast cancer if you're a woman. Can you explain the difference between 35% more likely and 20 times more likely?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the big problems with the media's reporting. There's a difference between absolute risk and relative risk. And when you say 35% more likely, that's a relative risk. And it doesn't mean anything unless you know what the actual numbers are. Let's say a disease affects one out of every million people. Well, if the incidence doubles, that means 2 out of every million people. So you can say you're twice as likely to develop this disease in such and such a study, but that only means 1 more person out of a million. So it's important when you read something in the news, if it's expressed as a percentage or a relative risk, you need to ask, how many actual patients are we talking about? What are the actual numbers? And the other thing is that they say if you eat kumquats, you're 35% more likely to develop muscular sclerosis or something like that. You read that kind of thing all the time. And all that means is that they did one study where people who said they ate kumquats were 35% more likely to have the disease, but that doesn't mean that kumquats cause the disease. It could be that people who eat kumquats do a lot of other things that affect their health. And so it's a correlation that doesn't prove causation. And the media likes to be sensational, and they like to say causation. Just this morning, I got an email that said that using a new toothpaste could prevent you from dying of a heart attack, because they'd done a study where they have some kind of a new plaque-identifying toothpaste, and the people who used that had a lower CRP, it's a measure of inflammation, and inflammation is correlated to heart attacks. So they were assuming that if you use this toothpaste, you'd be less likely to have a heart attack. But you can't conclude that from the data.
So you just mentioned if it's 1 in a million versus 2 in a million, that's twice as likely. But go back, and what's twice as likely in percentage? It would be, if I were a newspaper reporter, I would come on and say, oh my gosh, you're 100% more likely.
Yeah.
That's double. And that sounds like a giant number.
Yes.
In fact, you never hear 100%, I don't think. It's at that point, they change over, because if you say 100%, that could imply that you're going to get it. So, and the media, they never say, you're 35% more likely to get cancer if you live in Newton, Massachusetts. So that means they never follow up with the next part of the sentence, which is what you were saying, but that's really not significant because here's the absolute risk.
Yeah.
That's a big part to leave out.
Yeah.
Do you think that's intentional to sensationalize, or it's just...
I think it's a combination. They want to sell newspapers, they want to have interesting headlines, but a lot of the science journalists really are not well trained in science, and they tend to just read the press release and regurgitate it without inquiring into what it really means. They don't have the skills to understand what the studies really show.
When does it become statistically relevant? So twice as likely you'd start looking at it, 3 times as likely?
Well, statistical significance is a problem. In studies, we accept a cutoff of 0.05 p-level.
And you explain that,
And
please.
it basically means that if you repeat the experiment 100 times, 5 times you'll get you'll get positive results even if there's nothing to it. So it's not a measure of whether something is true. It's a measure of, well, in statistics they call it the null hypothesis.
Okay, yes.
If the treatment doesn't work, what's the likelihood that the study would falsely show that it does work? But there is a difference between statistical significance and clinical significance, because you may do a study and find out that something is statistically significant, but it really doesn't make that much difference to sick people.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
so for example, if it might be statistically significant that because it shows that it lowers your cholesterol by 1%, but 1% doesn't make any clinical difference to a person. It doesn't put you in a different risk category. It's such a small amount. But by the statistical rules, it shows to be statistically significant in that study.
So basically, the takeaway here is when you hear a news reporter say you're 75% more likely, you're 35% more likely, you're 95% more likely, it's a meaningless number almost.
Yes, you have to know what the base rate is. You have to know the
And that's
actual
never
numbers
given.
of people, not the percentages.
And we just started to touch on this, but how does it work in reverse? So when I hear something that says, eat walnuts in salad and you're 35% less likely to have a heart attack. Now, how does that work in reverse?
Well, that's just the same thing in reverse. It's really no different.
Until you know what the full numbers are, it's just
Yes.
interesting. All right. Is there some value to the placebo effect? And can you quantify it?
Okay, placebos make people feel better, but they don't have any effect on the actual outcome of the disease. They have subjective effects, but not objective effects. And every encounter between a doctor and a patient carries a placebo effect along with it. The bedside manner, the way the doctor presents the facts to the patient, all has an influence. It gives suggestions to the patient, and that's important. And they're doing some studies trying to pin down just exactly how that works. But prescribing placebos is frowned upon by all medical ethicists because it constitutes lying to patients. If I give you a sugar pill and I say, here, this is going to relieve your headache, I'm implying that it has a specific effect when it doesn't. So I'm lying to you, and that destroys trust in the doctor-patient relationship. But it's important to try to use the placebo effect along with effective medication. As a doctor, I need to learn how to present the effective medication to you in a way that adds placebo effect. It's the non-specific effects of the doctor-patient encounter that make a difference.
Okay. So if someone is very pleased that their newest quackery results in, it's equal with placebo effect. Is that something to be proud of?
Some people think so. I don't. It really bothers me because if you think you're better but you're not actually better, you might not get the care that you need. There was a study they did of acupuncture in patients with asthma. And the acupuncture worked just as well as the effective asthma inhaler as far as symptoms. The same number of people said they felt better. But then they looked at the actual pulmonary function tests of how much air, how they were moving air, and found that the people who got the placebo did not get any response. They weren't actually breathing any better. They just thought they were. And not recognizing how serious an asthma attack is one of the major causes of death in people with asthma. So if you take a placebo and you say, hey, I feel better, and your lungs are getting worse, you might not get to the emergency room in time.
The entire effect of feeling better was bedside manner in that case. I guess I should say it was acupuncture, but it was really trumped up bedside manner. And
well, we call it the non-specific effects of the patient-provider encounter.
okay, wow.
The main thing to remember is that placebos may make you feel better. They may make you less aware of your headache, but they're not going to make a broken bone heal any faster, and they're not going to make you get over a pneumonia any faster. They don't really have any effects on the underlying disease.
Speaking of placebos and studies and statistics, is there any value to anecdotal evidence? If you stack up 100 people come testify for ABC quack saying that this worked for me, is there any value to stacking numbers of testimonials?
Well, we have a saying that the plural of anecdote is not data, but anecdotal evidence has its place. That's how we first get the idea of what needs to be tested. It's a source for deciding what to study with science, so it has value in that sense. But no matter how many anecdotes you add up, it doesn't prove anything until you have a comparison group. You have to do control studies. So, 50% of the people who took this remedy got better. Well, how many people who didn't take the remedy got better? Maybe 60% of them did, for all we know.
How does one evaluate a statement that if somebody comes to you and says, well, I did this and I have more energy, or I did this and I felt better, so it works for me?
Well, that's the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, the idea that because you got better after the treatment, you got better because of the treatment. And that may not be so. The analogy I like to use is the rooster crowing in the morning. The rooster crowed and the sun came up. Therefore, the rooster made the sun come up. Well, obviously, the rooster didn't make the sun come up. But if you take a pill and you get better, it just seems intuitively obvious that it was the pill that made you get better, but maybe it was just another rooster.
One thing I've read that you said, that I read first from you, not this first part, so science is self-correcting, but I also read from you that half of all studies are later incorrect. And what I didn't understand from that, does that mean half of all studies are just poorly designed from the get-go, or half of all studies that show positive results are later found to be wrong?
Well, just half of all clinical studies in general, and there's a number of reasons for that. Generally, the first time something's studied, they do it with a small group and less than perfect methods. And so an initial study will come out and say treatment X works. And then they'll go back and do a larger, better designed study, and they'll find out that, oh, no, it doesn't really work. So that's how science is self-correcting. And people will say, well, that proves that science doesn't work because they get it wrong half the time. But no, they eventually get it right. And we know that they're wrong half the time because of science. Science corrects itself and eventually gets to the correct conclusions in the end.
And could you have a recent example? I mean, you're still up on all the current literature, so is there something that was done, say, 2 decades ago that was either determined to be either just, besides being non-effective, actually bad for health?
Well, that happens all the time.
All the time?
Yeah, when I was
all the time?
Yes, when I was an intern, we were taught to do routine episiotomies on every delivery. We were taught that that was better for the health of the mother and better for the health of the baby, and we all did it. And it would have been malpractice if we didn't. And today we know that routine episiotomies do more harm than good, and we only do them if there's a specific indication for it.
And how long ago was that?
I was an intern in 1970.
So that would have been malpractice not to do it. And now is it considered malpractice to just do it?
Well, I don't know if it would be a malpractice suit in court, but it's certainly not standard practice to do them routinely anymore.
And how did that come in? What happened to change that?
Better studies.
Let's talk about disease before we get into specific forms of alternative medicine. What is a disease?
A disease is basically any condition that interferes with the normal functioning of the body.
So it can be a simple disease such as the flu is a disease, or a cold, or a long-term disease such as a devastating disease such as cancer or multiple sclerosis.
Yes.
All right. And how much a disease is attributed to bad luck, just genes, I guess, and who you are, and how much is attributed to lifestyle choices?
Okay. Well, it's a lot of just bad luck, and for cancer, they've done some good statistics. They figure that about 30% of cancers are due to smoking, and another 20 to 30% are due to diet and lifestyle, and that includes obesity and alcohol, which is a biggie, and poor nutrition and lack of exercise. And 17% of cancers are from infections.
No. Oh.
Like the human papillovirus infection and the hepatitis B infection that leads to liver cancers. But heck, we've got vaccines for those. We can prevent those diseases if people would just get the vaccines. And then there's something like 3 to 5% of occupational exposures and environmental toxins and things like that. But the great majority of cancers are just bad luck. They're due to damage to the DNA from cosmic rays or environmental radiation. They're due to copying errors when the cell divides and the DNA gets copied and a mistake is made. And there's no way to avoid those things. And with infections, if you get exposed to a disease, it makes a difference how many disease organisms actually get into your body. It determines whether you're going to develop the disease or not, which is mainly a matter of luck.
And just to back up, so you said 30% of, not 30% of cancers, sorry. Say that again, that statistic?
30% of cancers are due to smoking.
So not just lung cancer, but many different cancers.
Yes.
And then lifestyle choices such as obesity and alcohol. And when you say alcohol, are you talking severe alcohol use or?
Just alcohol in general.
Oh.
And that's another 20 to 30%.
Wow, that's incredible. And so if everybody listening to this stops drinking right now, wow.
Well, the alternative medicine people, a lot of them like to think that you could prevent and cure all disease by just eating right.
Of the food.
And that is absolutely not true.
Well, let's start talking about some specific some specific so-called alternative medicines. We'll start with acupuncture. Probably one of the most studied, I think. Thousands of studies. Any significant positive results? I think recently someone sent me a study that said it was good for a small but statistically significant for mild pain or some type of pain and post-operative nausea.
Well, there's all kinds of positive studies of acupuncture, but you can't just look at the positive studies, you have to look at all the studies. And when you do that, you do systematic reviews of all of the published studies. And the consensus is that acupuncture is just a theatrical placebo. It doesn't matter where you put the needles. It doesn't matter if you use needles. There was a study that used toothpicks and just touched the skin with toothpicks, and it worked just as well as inserting the needles from acupuncture.
A theatrical placebo. And that's the consensus. And may I just ask what that means? I mean, I know what consensus means, but who's
The consensus of science-based doctors.
Okay, good. And I can only imagine that there must be some acupuncturists. We're watching this right now that just did a cartwheel over backwards. A theatrical placebo. Do you think that it is that they're delusional, or they believe in it, or they have to believe? This is kind of a hard question, I assume, to ask. But is there a literal fraud going on? Is it?
I think most acupuncturists legitimately believe in what they're doing, and they have reason to believe because their patients get better. But they don't do any comparisons with how many people would have gotten better with another treatment or another kind of placebo. And acupuncture has all the oriental mystique around it, the chi and the meridians and the acupoints, none of which have ever been shown to exist. But there's this big rigmarole, and acupuncturists have a good bedside manner, and they impress their patients, and the patients respond. And I have a friend who gets free acupuncture from a friend. She doesn't believe in it, but she's doing it to be polite to him. And she says, I feel really good when I leave the office, but a few minutes later, everything's right back the way it was.
Oh. Does she tell her friend that?
No.
But she goes back, so
she's trying to be polite. This is her friend.
Well, there are some
so
risks.
the doctor's left with the impression that, gee, I really helped this lady, when in reality he really didn't. He let her relax in his office for a few minutes, and she got some hands-on attention, and she talked to him, a sympathetic ear, and she felt better for a while.
As an acupuncture, it's also been given some status just due to the amount of studies, I would think, and now it's in the Air Force is using it.
Yes, they're using battlefield acupuncture, which is ear acupuncture, which was invented by a single individual in France in the 1950s. He imagined that the external ear looked sort of like a fetus curled up in the mother's wombs, and he said, well, the fetus's leg would be right there, so let's see what happens if I stick a needle there. Well, there's no connection between the ear and the leg. I mean, this is just absolutely ludicrous, and they've never done any decent control studies.
Well, how does it become taken seriously?
Well, because people don't understand how science works.
Do I need to understand? I'm sorry to interrupt, but do I need to know how science works to know that somebody is saying, oh, your ear looks like a baby's fetus, so this will help? Do you understand my question? Do I need to be scientifically educated to go, what?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just...
But it's surprising how many people think, oh, well, there might be something to that. And they don't ask the right questions. They don't understand that in science, you can't assume that something works without doing a control study and comparing it to another group of patients.
I have to ask a question about studies because you need permission to do a medical study, and you need to come up with a plan. I don't know what you call it. I've never done one, but I suppose there's a board you have to present to.
Yes.
So I go to the board and say, you know what? I think the ear looks like a fetus. So I want to do a study to see how if I poke what I think looks like a leg. Do you understand what I was saying?
Yeah.
So how does that study, and what is it, like a boardroom of people smoking cigars? I go, oh, sounds good to me.
Yeah, those are called institutional review boards, and they're designed to protect the safety of humans and human research. And there are some idiots on those boards.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to say that, but if I were on that board, there's no way I would vote for such a study, but those studies do get approved.
But it has been studied.
Yes.
Wow. And then it's given legitimacy by the by, who is it? Battlefield acupuncture? Who's using it?
The Air Force is teaching battlefield acupuncture. I think the other branches of the military are also using it in various capacities.
And what's it actually used for? Because don't tell me someone is using that instead of a real medical treatment.
Pain, basically.
Okay, so we're doing triage, we're getting people back to the hospital, but we're going to do this for some pain right now. Yeah. They're not using it instead of something else.
Well, they're talking about treating patients on the battlefield by inserting these little needles into their ear and leaving them there, and they've got them small enough that they fit under the helmet and everything. And my husband and I were both in the military, and our first thought was, gee, if a medic came to me when I was in pain from an injury, and instead of giving me my morphine injection, they tried to stick needles in my ear, I'd probably shoot them.
All right, let's move on. Subluxations, what are they? Do they cause disease?
Okay, there is a...
Now we've moved on to chiropractors.
Yeah,
okay.
there is a real condition called a subluxation. It's a partial dislocation of a joint. And you can see that on x-ray. And if you have an actual medical subluxation, that's a medical emergency. It's really a serious thing. But chiropractors think they see subluxations where there's no evidence that there is any partial dislocation of a joint. They'll take x-rays and say, oh, look, there's a misalignment of the spine. That's a subluxation. Where a radiologist will look at the same x-ray and say that's a normal x-ray. So the chiropractic subluxation is a myth. And their theory is that there's a misalignment of the vertebrae, and that puts pressure on a nerve or puts tension on a nerve, and the spine governs everything that happens in the body. So if there's a misalignment, that should explain everything from diabetes to colic in babies, which is ridiculous.
So I'm not an expert on this, but if you took a chiropractor and an x-ray, and I'm not sure what other a real doctor and an x-ray, and there's no subluxation on it, the doctor won't see it, but the chiropractor will.
Either that, or he'll say, well, it's a subtle subluxation that doesn't show up on x-ray, but I can
So how do
feel
you
it
tell
by examining the patient.
So the sense of touch is greater than, well, I imagine there are people that are more skilled at looking at x-rays than others. Would that be correct? I mean,
Yes.
I know when my wife goes in for some yearly exams, her x-rays are reviewed by 3 people to make sure that no one missed it.
Yes.
So if I gave 3 chiropractors the same x-ray, will they give me the same results?
Actually, there have been studies like that, and they've seen subluxations at different levels.
Oh.
A few decades ago, they did a thing where they asked chiropractic schools to provide some of their best examples of x-rays showing subluxations, and they couldn't come up with any.
They are called doctors, though?
Well, they're doctors of chiropractic, and they like to refer to themselves as doctors, which misleads patients. There are a lot of people that go to a chiropractor and think that they're seeing a real doctor who specializes in the back, and that's very misleading.
Well, I've seen, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen advertisements for allergies by a chiropractor. And at what point does this become practicing medicine without a license?
I got to tell you a story about that. I went to a talk by a chiropractor who claimed that he could diagnose allergies using applied kinesiology. Now, applied kinesiology is a muscle testing thing. He takes an allergen in a closed glass vial. He has the patient hold the vial in one hand, and then he presses down on their other arm. And if he feels that the muscles are weaker when the patient is holding that vial, that proves they're allergic to whatever is in the vial. And he said, I had one patient that I thought was allergic to something at work, and he worked for the Boeing company. And I didn't have a vial of Boeing, but I had the patient just think about Boeing, and that worked just as well. And in this chiropractor's talk, he happened to mention that he never did very well in science in school, and that was the one true thing he said in his whole talk.
So, but the person who has the allergy is going, ooh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the how do you pronounce it?
Applied kinesiology.
That's something I think I've seen as almost a parlor trick at malls. If you're walking down, they're trying to sell a balance bracelet or something, and they get somebody to put it on, and they do some kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not exactly sure how it works, but all of a sudden the person thinks they're more balanced. So it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's suggestion, and it's the person who's doing the testing may not be pressing as hard when he knows that you're holding the allergy vial. And there are parlor tricks that can make muscles look weak, and so I think some of them may be inadvertently using those tricks and pushing at a different angle and doing things slightly differently. They're not even aware they're doing it.
And some people are aware, I'm sure, because if it evolved from a parlor trick, it was a trick at once, I would think. So they are not doctors. Are they admitted as primary care physicians in any state that you know of?
They're trying to relabel themselves as primary care physicians, which is
So I would go to my doctor. So are they admitted in hospitals to order tests and
No.
x-rays? So they have their own, they have to use their own facilities, or?
Yeah. And they're simply not equipped to be primary care physicians. I mean,
First of all, they don't have medical degrees.
No, and they don't have the experience with sick patients. They mostly treat people who walk in off the street with backaches and things like that. And some of them know when something is seriously wrong, and they're able to refer patients to doctors, but some of them don't. There was a study where they sent a patient to several chiropractors complaining of symptoms of a heart attack, where if you went to a real doctor with those symptoms, he would have rushed you to the emergency room. And not a single one of the chiropractors recognized that it was serious, and they all tried to treat the patient for heart attack symptoms by adjusting their backs.
Wow. Do you find that offensive?
Yes, I do.
I mean, I'm not sure.
Another thing that I find offensive about chiropractors is that only about 50% of them are in favor of immunizations.
Is it that low?
Yes, that's by their own studies.
So how do treating subluxations help not getting mumps, the flu?
Well, originally, the person who invented chiropractic, D.D. Palmer, thought that subluxations were the cause of 100% of all disease. And if you just keep your spine straight, you won't catch those diseases. And some chiropractors don't even believe in the germ theory of disease. And there was a discussion on a chiropractic forum a few years ago where they were discussing whether it would be possible to die if you kept your spine in perfect alignment. And some people thought, no, you would never die.
And that was serious?
Yes.
Okay. So one thing we do know for sure, science knows with a certainty you will die.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's not going to be self-corrected.
It's never failed yet.
And I asked if you were offended by that. I imagine most people are, but also now I can see some people that will swear up and down they've been cured by their chiropractor or their acupuncture saying, well, you offend me. And I don't mean just you, but I mean you and your science-based medicine. Kind of hard not to say that without laughing, that that someone is offended by that. But you don't know everything, and this worked for me, and so I'm greatly offended myself.
That's their problem, not my problem.
Okay. Well, it might be my problem, actually, and we'll see how the emails go, right? Let's talk about magical medicine. And by those terms, I'm talking about all kinds of things like energy medicine, but I want to zero on homeopathy for now. It was invented in the 1880s with the like cures like, and I wrote some things down here. Based on what's now known about physics and the universe, the tenets of homeopathy, such as the law of infinitesimals and 30C dilutions, they aren't physically possible. And not only are those not physically possible, some of the remedies include, and I wrote these down, eclipsed moonlight is a remedy, tears from a weeping young girl, the south pole of a magnet, the Berlin Wall. And those are bottled remedies, I'm assuming. Tears from a weeping young girl, it seems like they might have cleaned that up a bit because I can only imagine that once that was a virgin. Maybe I'm wrong, but so eclipsed moonlight, tears from, have you looked into this? Have you studied this? Is it worth studying? I mean,
that's one of my favorites. They expose the water or the sugar pills or whatever they're trying to homeopathize.
Homeopathize?
To the light during an eclipse.
Oh, I see, okay.
And in the first place, eclipsed moonlight is really, the moonlight is reflected.
Right, sunlight.
Sunlight, and eclipsed moonlight is not light at all. So I just read about another new one that I hadn't heard of before, T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yeah. What? Well, let's go. What is homeopathy then? I've just said some things that it does, but can you tell me succinctly what is homeopathy and why is it so funny?
The way I like to explain it is with an analogy. According to the rules of homeopathy, if coffee keeps you awake, then dilute coffee would put you to sleep. And the more dilute coffee, the faster it would put you to sleep. And if you keep diluting it until there isn't a single molecule of coffee left, the water will remember the coffee and will even more powerfully put you to sleep. And you can take that water and drip it onto a sugar pill and let it evaporate, and the memory of the water will be transferred to the sugar pill, and the sugar pill will become a sleeping pill.
And what is all this about diluting then? How is that effective?
It isn't.
Okay.
I mean,
How is it thought to be effective, I guess?
well, it all started with Samuel Hahnemann, and in his day, conventional medicine killed people. It was not effective
In
at
his
all.
day was?
Late 1700s,
Okay.
early 1800s. Doctors were using poisons and bloodletting and things that we know today not to be effective. So by using homeopathy, he was essentially doing nothing. So his patients did better than the patients of the conventional doctors. And
So he looked like a genius.
yeah, he started with the idea that like cures like, because he took cinchona bark, which has quinine in it, and he developed symptoms that he thought were related to malaria. And in retrospect, he probably had some kind of an idiosyncratic reaction to the medication. But he said, well, if this cures malaria and also causes the symptoms of malaria, maybe we can treat patients with small doses of something that causes the same symptoms. And of course, when he gave people the full remedy, it caused symptoms. So he kept diluting it until it didn't cause symptoms anymore.
So he started with an idea, a theory, right? But he just kind of stopped too short.
He never tested it.
Oh,
He just kept trying it out on patients and kept getting good results.
okay. And where are we now with homeopathy? I mean, the country, the nation, it's still... They don't call themselves doctors, do they?
Not anymore. There used to be homeopathic hospitals in the United States. There aren't anymore. And there are still a few homeopaths. There are a few medical doctors who prescribe homeopathic remedies. But I think most of the people who take homeopathic remedies buy them in the drugstore.
Right, I just realized that. What am I saying? I go down the aisle of my local drugstore and they have a homeopathic aisle.
Yeah.
And so it's somehow self-perpetuating then like that? People just, obviously it's not hurting them, I guess, unless they don't seek treatment.
Well, the thing is, most conditions are self-correcting. Most things get better with time. If you have a cold and don't treat it, it usually goes away in a week or so. So they take a homeopathic remedy and their cold goes away in a week and they say, hey, it works.
So now you're talking about sort of the history of pain and whatnot. I mean, I've even done this myself. Even when I knew better, I had a really bad cold a couple of years ago. It got so bad I couldn't take it. I had to go to the doctor. It was the worst. And then 2 days later, I felt better because it was at its worst.
Yeah.
And I knew it, but I just felt, geez, maybe this is something else. I should go check it out. So there's a natural history there, and doctors are well versed in that, correct?
Well, you want to do something if you're suffering, like you said. You want to take some kind of an action, and placebos do work in that way. I've had that happen with a legitimate medication. I've taken an aspirin for a headache and immediately stopped thinking about my headache. And I know the aspirin had not had time to get into my bloodstream and do its thing, but just the idea that I had done something, that I'd taken some action on my own to relieve my symptoms, and then I could stop thinking about it instead of worrying about whether I should take an aspirin or not. I'd already done it, so I could stop thinking about that and thinking about other things, and I wasn't as aware of my headache anymore.
Let's sum up homeopathy with the dilution part, the 30C. Can you explain what that, so people will know what that means? If you go and you get your vial and it says 30C or whatnot on it.
Okay, one of the most popular homeopathic remedies is oscillococcinum, and that's on the shelves of your local drugstore. It's a cold and flu remedy, and it says 200C on it. What that means is they've taken a tiny little bit of duck liver, and they've diluted it 1 to 100.
Okay.
And then they've taken that dilution and diluted it 1 to 100, and they've done that 200 times.
All right, and I'm not a mathematician, so I'm lost.
Well, by the time you've diluted it, I think by the 23rd dilution or something like that, there's not a single molecule of duck left. So by the time you get to 200, I mean, it's totally ridiculous.
But the water remembers it.
Yes.
And that's in my local drugstore?
Yes.
It sounds like we're talking about, I don't mean to say this in a bad way, but I guess it'll come out. It just sounds like some kind of folk medicine you might run into in the highlands of a European country.
Yes, and most people who take those homeopathic remedies don't have any understanding of what they are or how diluted they are.
But are they? But if there's nothing in them, can we be sure they're safe?
No, we can't.
Oh.
And the FDA just
Jeez.
sent out a warning about
The FDA did?
homeopathic teething remedies. There have been babies who took a homeopathic teething remedy that was based on belladonna, and they had developed seizures and things that were typical of belladonna poisoning.
It's a serious drug.
It's poisonous to babies in high enough doses, and theoretically it should have been all diluted out of the remedies, but they don't have very good quality control over homeopathic manufacturing. And it's the amount of actual ingredient, there may still be some active ingredient in some of those products. So they don't know absolutely for sure, but they're very suspicious that these babies got an overdose of belladonna from the homeopathic products.
Well, when you had mentioned 200C, I can't imagine someone's really counting that out. They're just labeling it, because it's not even worth doing the time on it if there's nothing in it after that. Just 200C. Go ahead, Fred. Move the next one down the line.
Yeah, well,
Somebody's really 200.
They have it mechanized now, but I read
Apparently, it's not that effective.
I read a confession online of somebody who used to work for a homeopathic company where they were actually doing the dilutions by hand, and he said, we got tired of doing that, so we just started putting tap water in the vial and turning that in, and nobody ever said anything.
How does this make it to my marketplace? Why is this in my drugstore? It sounds dangerous in a way.
Well, it's dangerous in the sense that if people rely on homeopathic remedies when they're really sick, they may not get life-saving care in time. And of course, they're wasting money. Those things are not cheap, and people are wasting money that could be better spent.
Well, I've often said the government can't protect us from our own stupidity, but in this case, it seems like that is part of their job.
Well, it got grandfathered in. The story is really interesting because there was a congressman who was a homeopath way back when, and he pushed to get homeopathic remedies classified differently from regular medicines. And there's a homeopathic formulary. And
Formulary?
If it's listed in the homeopathic book, it's okay to market it. It doesn't have to be proven effective or safe like drugs do. It's a totally different category. And the FDA is looking at that, considering changing the rules, and I sure wish they would.
But the rules were changed to accommodate it, because it must have been, you can't just take anything to your drugstore and say, put this on yourself, it'll fix something, it'll cure you.
Yeah.
So they changed the rules to allow this to be not tested, not FDA approved. Yes. So now someone is finally wised up and they're saying, wait a minute, we got to take a look at this because it's costing, well, now that I think about it, it's probably, they must have a huge lobby, right? The homeopath, I don't know what they would call it, but.
I wish they'd put a label on homeopathic products that says contains no active ingredient for entertainment purposes only.
I wonder, I bet that wouldn't make any difference. People would still buy it.
No, it wouldn't. People don't read the warnings on natural medicines that say this product has not been approved by the FDA and is not intended to treat or prevent any disease.
Wow. Let's move on to naturopathy, whose remedies include gems worn as jewelry or placed around the home in special places. Okay, well, you're laughing, but people do this?
Yes, they do.
Gems, so that sounds like, I don't want to slight any, but now I have, in my head, I have some woman in a bandana with a little bit of incense burning saying, take this pearl necklace and place it on the sofa in the shadows of the moon and you'll feel better. I don't know, I'm making stuff up, but gems worn, what's naturopathy and how does it get to gems?
Okay, it's hard to define naturopathy because they kind of define it any way they want to. They're basically claiming to use natural methods to help the body heal itself. But they do homeopathy, they do all kinds of unproven and disproven treatments.
Are they doctors? I'm sorry to interrupt, but are they
They're
doctors?
doctors of naturopathy. They're not medical doctors.
So they have schools they go to?
They're only licensed in a handful of states.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I just wanted to, we've talked about what is a doctor, so go on, please.
Yeah, so they do some legitimate things. They use some herbal remedies that work. They prescribe diet and exercise and things that regular doctors do. They do a lot of the same things that regular doctors do, but they add a lot of quack things to it. And I wrote about naturopathy and about their training, and my conclusion was that the things that they do that work are not different from what conventional doctors do. And the things that they do that are different are not good.
So they do some of the same things? They don't go to medical school and then stop short?
Well, they have their own schools, and they claim that they have a education equivalent to medical doctors. They study anatomy and physiology and all that stuff, but they don't have the hospital contact with sick patients that medical students do. They don't have internships and residencies. They don't have anywhere near the clinical experience that doctors do. They don't have the kind of training in using prescription drugs. Their education simply is not comparable, but they'll try to tell you that it is.
You say they're licensed in some states. Can they prescribe medicine? Can they order tests? Are they in hospitals? Are they?
Some of them can prescribe medications.
Real medications?
Yes.
And by real, I mean go get some Oxycontin.
Prescription medications. It depends on the...
Are they trained for that?
Not very well.
Okay.
And they can't get on a hospital staff like a medical doctor can, so they're limited. But they have a lot of patients that go to them and think that they're a better kind of doctor.
Okay. Are they usually working as a supplement to someone's primary care physician?
They're usually working on their own.
But what I mean is I don't know if you would know the answer to this, but people that go to them, do they also have a medical doctor in the background? Because a lot of what you've talked about, it seems to me people practice this in addition to what they do.
No. A medical doctor would not practice naturopathy in addition to...
No, but what I mean is if I had something wrong with me, I went to my medical doctor, I'm getting that treatment, so I'm going to go see my naturopathist. Is that what they're called, to just supplement it?
Your naturopath might tell you to stop taking all those harsh prescription medications.
Now that sounds not right.
But most of them are treating their own patients that are not seeing medical doctors.
Oh,
In
so
fact,
they do have...
I've run across several people that had bad experiences with their regular doctors, and they said, "Oh, I'm never going to see a regular doctor again. I'm going to stick with my naturopath."
Okay, so some disillusionment with the system, I guess,
Yes.
there. Let's move on to energy healing. The NCCH defines energy healing as energy healing therapy involves the channeling of healing energy through the hands of the practitioner into the client's body to restore a normal energy balance and therefore healing. So my question is,
I love it. That's my question too.
So that is how it's defined. And what is the NCCH? The
National Centers for Complementary and Integrative Health. It used to be the NCAM, the National Centers for Complementary and Alternative Medicine.
So you're cured?
Yeah.
Is that how it works?
Yep.
I mean, that's probably simplistic, but it sounds simplistic.
This is all posited on a human energy field that is unknown to science. Now, physicists can measure the energies of subatomic particles. I mean, tiny, tiny energies of all different kinds, and they've never been able to measure anything that would correspond to this human energy field. It's non-existent. But people believe in it. The therapeutic touch people, that's a misnomer because they don't touch you. They touch your human energy field by moving their hands around your body about 6 inches away from your body. It's all imaginary.
But these people feel better after the treatment? As I have that with a question mark, I guess. Have there been studies? Has it been...
Yes, there have been studies, and the studies are what I call tooth fairy science.
Okay.
Now, you can do studies on the tooth fairy. You can measure how much money she leaves to the average child, whether she leaves more money to the children of rich families than the children of poor families, whether she leaves more money for the last tooth than for the first tooth. You can do all kinds of scientific studies and make measurements that are reproducible and statistically significant, and it sounds like good science, but it isn't because the tooth fairy doesn't exist. So they're doing clinical studies on therapeutic touch where they go in and they do this to a patient in the hospital and they say, oh, well, he got out of the coronary care unit faster because we did the therapeutic touch. But they don't even know what they're testing because there is no such thing. And the first step is to find out if they really can detect this human energy field. And there was a study by a 9-year-old girl for a school science project that tested therapeutic touch practitioners. And she said, well, here, can you feel the human energy field over my hand? Yes, I can feel it. Now can you feel it? No, now I can't feel it. Now I can feel it again. And then she set up a screen so they couldn't see where her hand was. And they couldn't guess any better than chance. They could not detect the human energy field.
I think I recall that study, and one of the frightening things about it was that, if I'm correct here, the practitioners thought they had done well by
Yes.
predicting chance.
Yes.
So they didn't even get the how you do a test
Yeah.
result, the test results correct. They were impressed by themselves getting like 25% or
Yeah.
so. Interesting. So she was a child, and I say to most of what we've been talking about, a child would reject magical thinking like that. Not in their preteens, but I read a lot of fiction as a child. And as I grew up, nobody told me that the stories I read were just make-believe stories. You kind of just grow out of it in a way. Well, and people read about Harry Potter's a big thing, has been recently, but and I imagine that 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds, when they become teenagers, they may have some fantasy-based life now where they think there's a Hogwarts where they could go to school, but they'll just grow out of it. No one is going to have to sit them down and say, Jenny, Hogwarts isn't real. You're going to have to go to MIT or whatever. They'll grow out of it. So I guess the question is, how is this propagated? So therapeutic touch, it's getting some, I think I read it's taught as continuing education for nurses in some place in California. So it's given, what's the word? It's given credibility, thank you. It's given credibility because now it's in the, it's a continuing education. I just read perhaps from you that most major medical schools are teaching so-called alternative medicine. It's something that the doctors can, I don't know if they have to do it, it's an elective, so it's given credibility within the system. So what's going on? How does it keep popping up?
We call that quackademic medicine, where quackery is getting infiltrated into hospitals and medical schools. And basically the reason is that doctors are not scientists. I didn't really learn what the scientific method was all about or about critical thinking until after I graduated from medical school. And doctors will read a study showing that acupuncture worked for something, and they accept it because they're used to accepting the results of studies on legitimate things. And sometimes they don't even realize what they're doing. Steve Novella had an interaction with the dean at Yale. They were offering a continuing medical education course in, or maybe it was in the medical school. Anyway, a course in complementary and alternative medicine. And he took the curriculum to the dean and he said, "Did you know that they're teaching this and this and this?" And the dean was horrified. He says, "No, I didn't know that." And the course got squelched.
How does it get past the dean? Where does the curriculum?
Well, it sounds like a good idea. But people are using this. People are asking their doctors about it. Doctors need to know about these things, and it's popular, and the public demands it, and it's sad.
And I guess if it gets into the schools and then the school thinks twice about it, it becomes a conspiracy.
Yeah.
To keep out. So you don't ever win, basically. You just keep fighting.
Right.
So you've mentioned science-based medicine blog. What is science-based medicine versus evidence-based medicine? Because to me, evidence-based medicine sounds like if you have evidence for it, it's medicine. So what's science-based medicine?
Okay, science-based medicine is what evidence-based medicine should be. But in practice, the people who are saying they're using evidence-based medicine are too reliant on clinical studies. They'll say, oh, well, we have a clinical study that shows that acupuncture works, therefore there's evidence. But for science-based medicine, we look at the prior plausibility. Well, there is no prior plausibility to homeopathy. It's against all the things we know about physics and chemistry and biology. It couldn't possibly work. So we take that into account, and we try to use common sense and basic science and kind of put all of science together and don't just rely on the evidence from clinical studies.
So basically what you're saying is that if it's scientifically impossible, don't even waste your time with it. So like the U.S. Patent Office, they won't even look at perpetual motion patents. They know doesn't work. And so you're saying if something just fails to occupy the basic realm of physical possibility, just don't even study it.
Not really, because there are things that we don't know yet. There
Okay.
might be some surprises out there. So I think if a new claim comes up and there's some anecdotal evidence or something to support it, it's worth looking into. And science does look into it. But when science looks into it and finds that it doesn't work, and it's also completely implausible, they shouldn't keep studying it.
Dr. Harriet Hall, thank you very much. I really appreciate your taking the time to speak with me. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I'd like to tell people about what I call the skepdoc's rule.
Okay.
And that's whenever you hear a claim, try to find out who disagrees with it and why. Because there's two sides to everything. And if the first time you ever heard about homeopathy, you took the time to look up the information that people have written explaining what it is and why it doesn't work, you might not get fooled.
And your website is skepdoc.info.
That's correct.
You write for Skeptical Inquirer. You write for Skeptic.
Yes.
Quackwatch, but that's got a new website now, is that right? Or
No,
no,
it's
still
still there.
Quackwatch. So you can be found writing almost anywhere.
Well, most of my work is done through the science-based medicine blog now. Science-based medicine, all one word.org. I write an article there every Tuesday, and I've been doing that since the beginning of 2008. And I'd also like to plug my video lecture series.
Okay.
I have a lecture series on YouTube. It's 10 lectures about science-based medicine and alternative medicine, and about how to understand science and how to think about studies and all the things that I've learned in my investigations that I want people to know.
And you can get that through skepdoc.info or just go to
You
YouTube
can get
and
that
search.
there. There's a link to it on the homepage of the Science-Based Medicine blog, or you can just Google my name, Harriet Hall, and YouTube, and it should pop right up.
All right. Thank you very much. Harriet Hall has been with me. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.